Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. On today's Another View on Health, the high cost of prescription drugs. Even with prescription insurance, many people find themselves having to shell out additional money to pay for their medication. Why are prescription drugs so expensive? Are generics a viable alternative? And what options do you have if you cannot afford to pay? Dr. Tim Jennings, Vice President and Chief Pharmacy Officer with Centera, shares some advice, along with our favorite cardiologist, Dr. Keith Newby. Stay tuned. Another View on Health is next, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Before we get into our discussion about the high cost of prescription drugs with our favorite doctor, Dr. Keith Newby, let me tell you about a couple things that are going on. First, if you are a minority or woman-owned business in the construction and trade industry, I hope that you're planning to come to the MWBE Vendor Fair. That's today, May 25th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Addicts Theater in Norfolk. There you will discover new business opportunities within the city of Norfolk, establish new relationships, find out and meet some of the developers, and really get an opportunity to participate in this industry. So if you have not signed up already, go to NorfolkTidewater.com. That's NorfolkTidewater.com and find out the rest of the information that you need to know in order to sign up. I have the pleasure of serving as the MC for this event, and so I hope you will come out and say hello, okay? Look forward to seeing you. And also want to pay tribute today to Maynard Eaton, who is a multi-award-winning journalist and media communications professional, and he passed away this past Tuesday evening in his sleep after a brief battle with lung cancer. Now, Maynard began his career in 1970 after graduating from Hampton Then Institute Mass Media Arts program, and he became WVEC TV's first African-American news person. So that is a huge, huge honor. And in 2022, he came full circle as he was appointed an endowed professor of journalism at Hampton University. So our condolences to him and his family and to our journalism family. He was an incredible journalist, spent most of his career in the Atlanta area, won 8 Emmy Awards. He became Journalist of the Year in Atlanta from the Atlanta Association of Black Journalists. Received several awards from the National Association of Black Journalists, and he got his start right here in Hampton Roads. So our condolences to his family and to our journalism community there. So according to the Congressional Budget Office, between 1980 and 2018, prescription drug spending in this country increased more than 10 times, even after adjusting for inflation. And according to a 2021 study by GoodRx, among adults who made healthcare changes because of drug costs, almost 19% delayed getting a refill and 16% rationed their medication. So what's driving the high cost of prescription drugs, and how does this impact our health? Joining me with some answers is Dr. Tim Jennings, Vice President and Chief Pharmacy Officer for Centera. Dr. Jennings, how are you?
Very good. Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you for being here with us. And my co-host of Another View on Health, our favorite cardiologist, and he really is an all-around good guy, Dr. Keith Newby. How are you?
Well, thank you. I try to be an all-around good guy.
He's an all-around good guy. Absolutely.
I'm doing well. And you, Barbara?
I'm doing just fine. You know, Dr. Newby, something special happened to you this morning, didn't it?
Yeah, actually it did. Well, listen, I'm going to preface it with this one comment. I got to throw this out here.
Okay.
My youngest daughter, Marcella, is graduating from Norfolk Collegiate tomorrow.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, thank you very much. That's my last one, and I'm going to tell you, but I'm proud of that young lady. She got into 14 universities.
Wow.
14.
Wow.
I give that young lady all the credit in the world. That's my D-O-double-G.
Absolutely.
My partner in crime, always have been.
And when is she landing?
She's going to be going to UNC Chapel Hill.
Following Daddy's footsteps.
Yeah, but listen, I'll tell you the interesting thing. She actually is going to be spending her first semester in Ireland. There's some global launch program they have down there, so she's going to be out of the country. And I don't know what I'm going to do.
My baby.
Oh man, I'm telling you, listen. I might take a Valium.
Oh no,
but I can't afford it.
There we go. Absolutely.
But anyway, I had to throw that out there.
Yes.
So I appreciate any congratulations that anybody throws my way.
Yes,
because I give all that credit to my wife. She has been just as diligent with trying to make sure she has her on the right path, which I think she did an excellent job.
That is fantastic. Congratulations to the whole Newby family.
Thank you very much. So I was walking, so I always do my stairs when I'm here at the office. So when I was walking down the stairs today, and I got on the ground level, and I was getting to walk out the door to go to the hospital, and a young lady that approached me, and she said, "Dr. Newby," and I turned around, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." And she says, "Listen, can I stop you for a minute?" I said, "Yeah, sure." So she says, "I just want to thank you." And I said, "Well, I don't know I did anything, but I appreciate it." I said, "What did I do?" And she says, in my opinion, you saved my life. I was like, wow. I'm saying to myself, I said, I don't remember taking care of you. I thought my memory was pretty good. I know I'm getting a little older, and she says, well, you were on the radio last month with,
we talked about
atrial fib. And she says, and I had been feeling palpitations, and I just was too scared to go anywhere. And when I heard you and some of the things you said, I immediately set up an appointment with my primary care doctor who got me hooked up with a heart monitor, and I found out I had atrial fibrillation, and they told me I could have had a stroke if I didn't get on this medication. My heart rate was going 140 beats a minute, and she says, I just wanted to thank you for doing what you do. I mean, it just came out the clear blue sky.
Oh.
So I just said I had to share that with you this morning because I said, one of the things in this job that really, I don't ever ask for accolades for anything. I hate awards, and you know how I am with that.
Yeah.
But when it comes down to somebody that you feel like you touched their life in a positive way, that to me is my reward. I mean, I'll take that over any award somebody gives me any time in my life.
Absolutely. And to that young lady, thank you, because that's what we try to do every week on Another View, is just to share information and let people be informed so that they can live a better life. And that just warms my heart to hear that.
Amen.
That is great. Okay, so now Tim, you really on the hot seat.
Well, I was just going to say, Dr. Newby, you really set the bar pretty darn high for me. So,
that's why I reached out to you, Dr. Jennings, because I said after you and I talked, and I'm going to tell you this background real quick, Barbara.
Okay.
What this was during the pandemic, and and Dr. Jennings, to his credit, was very instrumental with me getting access to vaccine when we first started. And that's how he and I became friends, was dealing with trying to maneuver through a tough system of getting access to vaccine to try to inoculate people in this city. And I just happened to say, listen, I want to have a conversation with you about these drug prices. And that's how we had that conversation. And I kept that in mind. I just said this would be a prime opportunity because he enlightened me so much on kind of how this works. Because I'm whining all the time because a lot of the medications we have to use in heart failure are very expensive, and and they're saying these are all what we have in the American College of Cardiology world, the guidelines we have that we're supposed to follow on how to treat certain conditions, and a lot of the current guidelines for heart failure are unfortunately so brand name drugs. And when you talk about they come up with some ridiculous price, even those people that have health insurance, and they can't afford them, but yet they say this is the best stuff that we want people to have, and it's frustrating. Even drugs that go generic sometimes, I've been waiting for a drug to go generic so I can see the price drop, and sometimes you don't even see the price drop when it goes generic. So I said, that's what I called out to Jen. I said, would you do this show with us next month when I talked to him last month? Because I said, I think people just need to hear kind of how this process works.
Absolutely. And so Dr. Jennings, what goes into the pricing? Because you hear so many different things, but it's more than just manufacturing the drug, right?
Yeah. So let me, because you opened up with a stat that said from 1980 to 2018, the cost of drugs has gone up 10 times. So the reason that is over time, let me explain that, is one, the advent of the prescription drug card came out in the mid-'80s. And as soon as that came out, that gave a lot of people ability to gain access to pharmaceuticals in a more cost-effective manner, because it used to be a cash business prior to that, predominantly cash. But the expansion of those insurance plans led to just increased utilization. So that came up all the way through, to the mid-'90s, and then in the mid-'90s, the brand percentage was about 60% brand, 40% generic. Okay. Which means of all the prescriptions that were dispensed, taken at home, 60% of those were brand. Do you know what that is today?
What is it today?
It's only 10% brand and 90% generic.
Because people can't afford brand?
No, because brand represents a much smaller percentage of number of prescriptions that that are now branded. Okay? But where do pharmaceutical manufacturers make their money?
Well, I thought it was with the brand name drugs, right?
There you go. So they make it in brand. So think of it this way. When I had 60% of all the prescriptions back in the early 90s, I could profit off of 60% of those prescriptions. Now I can only really profit off of 10%. So what do I have to do? I have to raise the rate.
I got to raise the price.
So it's really a shrink, and I know that seemed long, but it really explains why, because they're making more money on a smaller number of scripts.
So what happens when, so you start out with a brand drug, and then how does it get to generic? Is it because of the patent?
Yes.
Okay.
So it has a patent lifespan, and that patent lifespan is supposed to be 17 years, but much of that may be eaten up with further study and things like that. So they may only get about 10 or so years out of the marketing of the product. But there's a lot of ways around that as well.
So I get that they're making money off of 10% versus 60%. But in that 10% also, because those are some pretty well-produced commercials that come out about these brand drugs. So the marketing fees apparently we're paying for also. Is that not correct?
Well, yes, that is very true. When the FDA allowed that to go direct-to-consumer advertising, that added a lot more. But to be real honest, that's small figures compared to the billions of dollars that are being, brought in by pharma for these products. So that may be a large number, but it's not nearly as large. That's not really driving the cost, because much of that is recouped very easily just with utilization.
Gotcha. So the other thing that people will say a lot is that if you get medication while you're in the hospital, for example, that an aspirin will cost you 10 times or some percentage more than what it normally would cost. So does that play into the equation at all, or is that true?
No, not really. And hospital pricing is different, primarily because it goes beyond just what the drug costs. It's the getting the drug to the floor. But it's also just the expense of the whole department. I mean of that hospitalization. So, and that and the difference within hospitals is that we can't turn patients away if they don't have any, if they can't pay. So,
Right.
So some of that overcharge is simply because many people don't pay because they don't have the means to pay.
I see. So that covers those
Right.
who cannot pay.
Correct.
757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Are you struggling with having to pay for prescription drugs? Do you need some help in that area? Have you done some things like some people suggest about cutting your prescription in half or not refilling? What are you doing in order to make sure that you can maintain the prescription drugs that have been prescribed for you? 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. So, Keith, do you know how much the drugs cost that you prescribe? And when I say you, I mean you personally, as well as you as in the universal doctors. Are you looking at cost, or are you just looking at this is what's going to make you better?
Well, I have to look at both, unfortunately. So because I can't let. I mean, I give you a prime example. Blood thinners, which is we talked last month about atrial fibrillation. So the blood thinners that we use for atrial fibrillation is a couple of types. There's one that's what they call direct thrombin inhibitors, which are the newer, more novel anticoagulants, and that's drugs like Eliquis, which you may have seen commercials on. Xarelto is another one. Those are like the most common two now we use. Now, that stuff is great in terms of ease of use, ease of taking it, because you just take it in your blood's thin probably 30 minutes after you take the drug, versus warfarin or Coumadin, which was the first initial one we used to use a lot of, that takes forever to get your blood levels up. And then you have problems. You can't eat certain types of foods on that because it will reverse the levels of Coumadin. And, there's just a lot to that one that's different from the other ones. But the cost, I've had people tell me, when they didn't have health insurance, they're paying $500-800 a month trying to buy these types of medications. And even some with insurance, and that's the part that kills you. It's kind of like between big pharma and insurance companies, I want to choke myself because they'll say, oh, yeah, we'll approve it, but we're only going to pay this amount. So then it's left on the patient because they want you on Coumadin because that's dirt cheap for them. The insurance companies. So they'll do things like there are some, but it depends on your plan. So some plans, people are paying $10 a month. Then other plans, they're paying a couple $100 a month. So that's why I tell patients all the time, be careful. They'll go for these low deductible, low cost insurance plans, but the problem is that they don't cover a lot. And that's why they could be low cost, low deductible, because they're going to turn you down a lot. So Entresto, which is another one I use for heart failure, Entresto is a brand name drug. It is like class 1 indication now for heart failure, meaning everybody agrees that this is the way you should treat heart failure is using that particular medication. But I've seen it $800 a month for those without insurance. Now, again, it depends on your insurance plan, but just cash payments, those things can be quite pricey. So then you run into that problem is you want people to have the best that is out there, but I mean, realistically, they can't afford it. So I have to balance it all out.
So, and those drugs that you mentioned, they don't have a generic equivalent, or do they?
They have a generic name, but they're still patented. So those drugs are just brand name drugs.
I got you.
Which goes back to that question earlier that I would pose back to Dr. Jennings when you talk about. I know that you talk about 10% would be a branded drug, but when they're still under their patent, that's the only option that you have on that particular drug. So they're really getting 100% of the market, right, for that particular time frame. So they get, so the problem is, and I'll give you one other example. There's a drug that I used to love that it was, called Ticasant or Defetalizer, antiarrhythmic we use for atrial fibrillation. Mm-hmm. And that was a drug that I loved that drug to a certain degree, and it was really expensive for folks. And I was itching, waiting for that drug to go generic. I said, so I could watch this price drop. And I was so heartbroken. I've been waiting for 15 years for that thing to go generic. It goes generic, and then I write my first script, and the patient came back, this is just as expensive as what you gave me before. So I'm calling the pharmacy, fussing them out. I say, what's up with this? And this is what you got. So that's the part that kills me is how you would think, because before a lot of the drug companies, they say, oh, it's our marketing, our R&D, this and that we have, why your price is so high. But then I'm like, well, I mean, there's no R&D once it goes generic because the drug's already proven what it's going to do. There's no more marketing. Why is this price still so high?
So, Dr. Jennings, talk about generics. I mean, what
Sure.
does that mean, and are they as effective? Because some people think if I don't have the brand name, I'm not getting the same drug.
So I want to open, and I talked to you about this on the phone when I talked to you earlier, Barbara, is that I'm going to sound like the weatherman on this. In other words, I'm going to tell you something, but I don't have any control over it.
Got you.
But this is how generic drugs, when they first go generic, it works. And Dr. Newby, you're spot on that the drug, we all wait for those generics to be released, but the very first generic gets a period of exclusivity, and that period of exclusivity typically lasts 6 months. And during that time, the drug cost only falls. It's like perfect 10%. It usually drops by only 10%. So it's still very costly, maybe not quite as bad as it was before, but a 10% discount on a lot of money is still quite a bit of money. Until there are more generics that come into the market, i.e. creating competition, then there'll be a bigger, price drop. And a drug like Defetalide, I would think, doesn't have, it's not like a drug like we had in the old days, like Simvastatin or, Zocor, where there were so many people on that drug for cholesterol that when it went generic, there was a ton of prescriptions out there that once it went generic, there was a big cry for many generic entrants to come in because there were many prescriptions for that product. But with Defetalide, I wouldn't think there's probably as many, prescriptions out there. So the number of entrants probably is not as great. And the price probably hasn't fallen all that much. I didn't check that one, but that's my guess in what happened in that regard. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. But I want to circle back also to the from the consumer's perspective. Is the generic a safe drug?
Oh, okay. So the answer to that is, I'll answer it this way.
Okay.
I take only generic drugs if I have to take a drug. If there's a brand and I have to have the brand, I'll take the brand. But if there's a generic available, I will take it.
Mm.
And the reason that is because in the United States of America, the safety net from the requirements of the generic products are very, very high. And and early on, there were drugs. It was funny back in the day when we had brand name Dilantin, which was a drug for seizures.
Mm-hmm.
When the generic came out, it was actually more available to get into your bloodstream than the brand was. So patient actually did better, got higher levels on the generic. And, I kind of give that as an example because there's a high standard for generics to make sure that they have good absorbability and dissolution and things like that so that they get into your body.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, they're very, very safe to use.
So do you ask your doctor to specifically prescribe generic, or I know you got the inside track because you're a pharmacist, but but is that what people should do? Should they ask their doctors to?
They definitely should. When you go to the doctor and just say, is there a generic alternative that I can take in place of this because I may not be able to afford the brand.
Gotcha. If you're just joining us, we're talking about prescription drug costs on today's Another View on Health. My guests are Dr. Tim Jennings, Vice President and Chief Pharmacy Officer for Centera, and my co-host, cardiologist, Dr. Keith Newby. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have about taking your prescription drugs? Give us a call, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Tim, we have a question from Facebook. Christine in Chesapeake wants to know, what do you think about getting meds online delivered directly to your door?
That is it's definitely an increasing number called mail order pharmacy. Mm-hmm. And that is a very safe way of doing it. And, I would encourage people that if that is a way for them to make sure that they can get their medications and they're comfortable with that, what that takes away, if you want to have a question and talk to your pharmacist, you can get it filled locally, so that you don't have as much of unless you call in, because sometimes there are numbers for you to call in and actually speak to somebody and ask questions. But just make sure that if you do have questions, because one of the things that we learn with pharmacy is that typically somebody goes to the doctor, a very compliant patient goes to the doctor probably no more than 4 times a year, but yet they go to their pharmacist once a month. So because, you typically get a 30-day fill. And when you do that you have a lot more opportunity to ask questions if you're having any problems and you need some reassurance about maybe an adverse event that you're seeing with that drug. Because the whole thing is, many drugs do have some kind of adverse event, but some kind of side effect, I should say. Yeah. But many times those could be overcome just by either taking it with food, without food, or something else. Many times as you continue to take that med, that side effect diminishes over time.
So, and I'm glad you brought up side effects, because my question to you about them is this. First of all, as you listen to the commercials about various drugs, by the time they get through the list of the side effects, I don't know why anybody would want to take the drug, but that's another story. But how do you know when it is a side effect that your body just needs time to get used to it versus this is more serious, or this is not what's supposed to be happening?
And I think there are certain side effects that will subside over time, and then there's some that depending on the medication. For example, if you're not on a drug that that Dr. Newby just mentioned earlier, one of those anticoagulants, if you notice that you're having bleeding either in your urine or excessive bruising or anything like that, then those are things that you need to bring to attention to your physician, because there may be some kind of adverse event going on that needs to be a side effect that needs to be dealt with much more, quickly. And that kind of education, you really probably ought to know, and should ask your pharmacist or your physician, what are those adverse events that I need to be truly aware of.
While we're on that point, because I'm gonna tell you what I got to deal with in my world is that you get some patients that will, because I have a certain group of patients that I know when I put them on something, because I know how they are, they're going to call it with some kind of side effect. I mean, it's like, sure as I know my name, I predict it time I give it to them. I got to give it to them, but I know them too well. They're going to find some side effect in anything I provide. And I know that group of people when I run into that. Now, there are some legitimate issues that you will pop up with, but I tell you what, it really kills me and I hate is like retail pharmacies, when they give you a medicine, they'll give you that list of side effects that you hear about on the commercials. And it's like, I'm trying to tell patients, I said, listen, just because you take a medicine, it does not mean you're going to experience one of those. You may not experience anything. I have some patients on meds that never had a single hitch in the world. I said, and unfortunately, we have our books called the Physician's Desk Reference, where they list about every drug known to mankind in there. And when you look at the medication, I give you an example, like say simvastatin, it was mentioned earlier, which is a statin drug for cholesterol. They will list, when they did the studies and they look at adverse events, they'll give you the typical percentage of people who experience these adverse events. And then they'll have like less than 1%, and they got like 800, because they're less than 1% of patients experience those. But the problem in the retail pharmacy world, they don't give you that breakdown. They just say these are the potential side effects, which can be misleading. Because I want to know, because if something has a 20% risk of a side effect versus less than 1%,
you're
I'm
more
going
likely
to be looking,
to prescribe it. Yeah,
exactly. And unfortunately, so when they don't do that, it can be misleading to the patient. They're going to look at this list that says 800 side effects up here. Why would I want to take this? Just like what you mentioned there. And I know a lot of it, unfortunately, so is liability. A lot of these, they're not trying to get sued. I don't put it up there. Then they may,
and something happens.
Something yeah.
Gotcha.
So but that's one of the things we have to run into in the medical world is trying to convince patients that these drugs ain't gonna kill them. Because a lot of people are convinced that they take this stuff, and I'm like, listen, if you have heart failure and your heart's weak, and we don't prescribe this stuff, we got data that's, and I give people the spiel. I have data that's been done in the literature that promotes the use of these medications, and these are the reasons why. And they're really designed to try to help your heart get better. And that's where sometimes we run into an issue of trying to get people to really understand the importance of it is not just pushing pills, but we have information that says if we do these things, the percentage of you're going to get better is going to be pretty high. And that's the thing that goes into that, but they got to be able to afford them at the same time.
Let's talk to Brian in Hampton. Hi, Brian. You're on the air.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
A couple years ago, I was prescribed Eliquis. I was in between insurance, so I was going to have to pay out of pocket. I went to the pharmacy. It was going to be about $2,300 for 90 days. I pulled up GoodRx to see if anybody had it cheaper, and found another pharmacy had it for about $32. Now, my question is, same medication, same period, two different pharmacies. How in the world is that disparity even possible?
All right, let's see if we can get Dr. Jennings to give us some understanding.
It's all on you, Dr. Jennings.
That one I don't know if I can explain. Because Eliquis is still a branded drug, so I'm not sure how they were able to give that to you unless they had some kind of this is the only thing I can think of, is there are patients assistance programs because you were in between insurance plans that you may have qualified because at the time you were uninsured.
Well, he said he used GoodRx though for the lower price.
True, but
I don't know if they asked the questions about insurance plans when you go at GoodRx.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not too sure how GoodRx could have gotten
it down
price
that low.
that far. Yeah. That one I can't answer.
Because sometimes it depends on that they, and it may be, when they got drug or whatever, or, because I don't know how it works. And Dr. Jennings, if they have drug that's, say is close to expiration, would they cut the cost just because they don't want to let it go bad before they give it to people, or would they ever drop a price for that reason?
Potentially, but.
But GoodRx and others like that, those discount cards, they're able to do the discount because of the what they work out with larger pharmaceutical chains. Is that how that works?
Yes, and it's primarily GoodRx works really well with generics. Mm-hmm. I wasn't as familiar that it worked as well with brands.
Okay. Brian, hope that answered your question. Thanks so much for the call. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have about your prescription drugs? Dr. Jennings, what are some of the major things we do wrong when we take our medicines?
Well, one of the things that I always what I've kind of made myself do is I put my medications in a certain place so that every morning as I'm getting up and getting dressed, that they stare at me in the face, so that I'm reminded to be compliant because they're right there. If I have to go somewhere to go find them, like I put them in a box in something where it's not during my routine, I may not be as compliant. So I think even simple things like that you can put the meds, like if you have to eat them with dinner, well then put them on the table in the dining room or in the kitchen, so that they're there when you have to take them. Yeah. Because it's just proximity, and it's that awareness that you need to take that med that way.
Mm-hmm. Make sure you work it into your routine. At least that's what Correct. I have to do with my blood pressure medicine, for example. It's a part of my morning routine now.
And that's what my routine is. Getting dressed in the morning, so I go in there, and that's where I do it. I'd rather not keep them in the bathroom, because the bathroom there's too much humidity, and the medications might not be as potent after a while. May not work as well. So I'd rather keep them out of the bathroom proper, but it's better to have them,
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay. So, see, we learn something new every day on Another View. That's the thing. What about putting them in those cases? The pill pack, right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If that's a good way to do that, that's another very good reminder. That's a good way to remember. Now, did I take my meds today? Because I can't remember if I took them when I first got up. So that's where that kind of reminding system is extremely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. We also got a question from Lynn in Suffolk. Wants to know, is there a time of day that's better to take medicine?
And that depends on the medication. Certain meds work better when they're taken at night versus the morning. But, and Dr. Newby, I'd be interested in your comment on this. For example, the statins, they say work better if you take them at night.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I always take my meds in the morning, and I take them 100% of the time. If I take them at night, I forget them. So I think you have to factor in some of those other things.
And that is exactly what I was going to say. I tell people when they ask me, I say, when you going to remember to take them?
So it really does. It does because my
it
statins
does.
also, they said take that at night. But my original blood pressure medicine, for example, I was supposed to take at night, but because it contained a diuretic, I was up all night. So the doctor changed it and said take it in the morning, and it worked out fine. So
and I tell you what that's all about. If you look at, there's something called circadian rhythm of blood pressure, where there are certain times of the day, and typically in the morning, where blood pressures are the highest. Some people it's the opposite, but a lot of people it's highest in the morning. So you think about how a drug works. And Dr. Jennings, please correct me if I'm way off base, but I try to remember from pharmacology way back in medical school. But when you first take a drug, it first has to start to digest. Then, and it depending on if it's an extended release tablet where it slowly releases over a 24-hour period. And no drug really, to me, lasts 24 hours. They say it does, but it really doesn't. Because you think about how the drug works, it's almost like a roller coaster where it has to go up the hill as the drug levels start to rise. Usually, to me, about 30 minutes after you take it, you'll start seeing the effect, and there'll be a slow kind of upward progression. And then it peaks out, and then it slowly goes back down. So there's going to be, this high level and then a lower level. So you think about when do you need that drug most? If you have a circadian rhythm of your blood pressure, where your blood pressure is the highest in the morning, and you take that drug at night, that means when your blood pressure starts to rise, the medicine is at its full peak to keep it lower. And then if it, during the day, of course, if your pressure is going to be lower during the day, the medicine is not as readily needed because the effects have already occurred when it was most needed. So it's kind of one of those, they try to time it based on when it's going to be the most effective for when you need it the most. So that's the basic premise. But I'm with Dr. Jennings. If I got a patient that only is going to take it 50% of the time because he's going to forget taking it at night, then that's really not doing them that much good. So I just say take it when you can remember.
So what about, Dr. Jennings, the people who do, because I've seen people do this, they'll cut their pills in half to stretch it out, or they won't get the refill, or if they get the refill, they won't get it right away. So there's a gap in between the last time they had the medicine and the next time they're able to refill it. What does that do to your system, number one, and how? I don't think that's something pharmacists would recommend.
Yeah, no, that's not something that I would recommend, because when you start falling less than 90% compliant with your medications, you're not going to get the full effects, the benefits of why you're taking it. So if you're spending a lot of money on something, by extending it, by cutting it in half or taking it every other day,
right,
is only going to make it less effective. So that when you go back to your doctor, Dr. Newby's going to look at you and say, your blood pressure is really high. Why is that? Well, it's because I've been cutting my pills in half.
If they tell,
he'll be able to tell that simply because the parameters that he's measuring aren't going to be as controlled.
Mm-hmm.
So I would not advocate that. Trying to maybe look for the generic opportunities, looking for if you have a 90-day plan, could you only get 10 days or 30 days worth, because that other gentleman wanted 90 days for $3,200. You could always get less, and it'll cost less dollars. So that's a better way maybe to go about it. But I really wouldn't want to try to decrease the amount unless you've talked to your provider and they're with you on, well, you didn't need that much. But typically, if they've asked you to be on that dose, that's what dose that they're expecting. That'll work the best for you, and to treat whatever they're treating, whether it's atrial fibrillation or high blood pressure.
Mm-hmm. So, what other services does a pharmacist provide? Besides, obviously counting out the pills and filling the prescription, but
right.
But what else can you get with your pharmacist?
One of the things that my focus and simplify answer to that is, I always try to make sure that when that the doctor, whatever the doctor has prescribed, really makes sense for what the patient what kind of disease state they have, because there are errors in prescribing periodically, because there's so many different kind of medications out there. So we can be their wingmen and just make sure that, did you really intend to do this? And as well, I do try to be the advocate of looking for something that may be a little bit more cost effective, because those are things that can be helpful to, promote wellness with that individual. And, it's, if it's less costly for them, they may be more compliant with it in the long run. So there's that. And then really just trying to make sure that a drug-drug interaction that I'm aware of doesn't end up hurting that individual. So much of my practice was in a hospital, so I would be monitoring the labs and looking for lab indications of early drug toxicity that I needed to modify either the dose or the regimen. And those are the kind of things that I think a pharmacist can really do, is to help make sure that what the doctors provided is safely administered and taken by the patient.
So how that whole idea of drug interaction, because if a patient doesn't tell you everything that they're taking, and including over the counter and herbal supplements also, correct?
Right.
Doesn't that all affect how the drug?
It definitely can, yes. So one thing I would always encourage is, I would encourage you to, if you have a prescription drug card, always use your prescription drug card to get your med. And then you can go to different pharmacies. But if you don't have a prescription drug card, you must go to the same pharmacy, because then the pharmacy can see Barbara Ham Lee's profile.
Got you.
And know what medications they're on. But what the benefit of the insurance coverage is, if I go to 3 different pharmacies, there could be a message that could be sent back from the insurance company to the pharmacy to say there's a drug-drug interaction there. So, and just alert them that they're on this other drug somewhere else.
Are you still, is in the industry as a whole, is it an issue in terms of if someone is addicted to a certain drug and they're going from pharmacy to pharmacy? Is that still an issue?
Well, that is an issue for, the opioids. But sometimes people don't, I would try to treat your pharmacy and try to go to the same one, so that all of your records are in one place.
Okay.
And that is probably a better thing. But somebody who may be shopping because it's expensive may go to different pharmacies. And that's when it's harder to find a drug-drug interaction, because pharmacist A isn't going to know that it's pharmacist B that they filled something else. Because there's no record of it, because it was paid in cash. So there's no, it doesn't go anywhere.
Got you. Dr. Newby?
Yeah, can I ask one question out?
Absolutely.
Canada. Now, a lot of patients get their medicines from Canada or out of the country because it's cheaper. So the question I would throw out is, depending on, of course, where it's manufactured, and I know there are other variables, but, why would necessarily the drug be cheaper getting it out of the country than it would be in the States? Is that, because obviously the regulations or other factors may be different, but what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Jennings?
So I will say that in Canada, many of the wholesalers have actually shut down pharmacies if they know they're prescribing for Americans. And the reason that is the drug companies, the cost of meds is, probably 20%, 30% of what it is in the States. But it's the old generic analogy I gave earlier. They have such a small market of drug use up there, medication use, compared to the states, that they don't mind that they don't make as much money on that, probably 10% of what we consume in the states. So their costs can be lower, and it really doesn't affect them. The quality of the drug is the same, but I know that there's been a lot of write-ups I've seen where local municipalities. One time, the city, one of the cities in Connecticut, their main city tried to, contract with
the farms.
Canada to provide the meds, and that all got shut down because of that. So I will say, if you go to Mexico, that's probably less safe, because the scrutiny is nowhere near what it is in Canada and the United States.
Well, unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time. I tell you what, this hour just flew by.
It always does.
It always does. Dr. Tim Jennings, who is the Chief Pharmacy Officer and Vice President with Centera, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of this important information. We appreciate that. And Dr. Newby, as always, thank you so very much, my brother.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for spending part of your afternoon with us, audience. Lots of very valuable information in today's show. So if you'd like to hear it again or share it with a friend, please visit our website, anotherviewradio.org, and download the podcast. And remember to sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. Next week on Another View, it's the Another View Roundtable with a twist. Dr. Eric LaVille joins the table to talk about today's current events. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. It's Memorial Day weekend, y'all, when we pay homage to those who made the ultimate sacrifice to defend our country. And it's also the unofficial start of summer. So however you observe the holiday weekend, have fun, stay safe. And we're going to take you out today with a tribute to Tina Turner, who passed away this week. A great musician, and truly will be missed, but her music goes on eternally. So take a listen to her iconic Proud Mary, and we'll see you next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Saw the good side of the city until I hitched a ride on the riverboat queen. Big wheel keep on turning. Proud Mary keep on burning. And we're rolling, yeah, rolling on a river. Say we're
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. Whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students, Learn more at leaveabequest.org.